Before we begin, please leave a comment, share your thoughts and let us know your lessons learned in the comment section below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Zuri stood at the edge of the crowded marketplace, her bare feet pressing against the cracked earth. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a dull orange glow over the dusty rooftops of the village. The air was thick with the scent of spices, roasting meat, and the ever-present dust that clung to every surface. Yet, for Zuri, it all felt distant. She barely noticed the people hustling by, the sound of children's laughter, or the chatter of the vendors. Her mind was far away, lost in a storm of confusion and fear. She clutched a small bundle of coins in her hand, the last of what her family had. Her mother had sent her here to buy medicine for her little brother, who had been writhing in fever for days. The clinic, a crumbling building on the outskirts of the village, had turned them away, citing the lack of payment. The world, it seemed, was always cold and indifferent, especially to families like hers, poor, struggling, and invisible. As Zuri passed the stalls, she could feel eyes on her. Whispers followed her, and it wasn't just the usual gossip of the village. These whispers carried an undertone of something darker, something more sinister. She was too young, too innocent, to fully understand it, but she could feel the weight of the looks. And then, as if the universe had decided to intervene, she saw him. Gregory Hayes was a stranger in every sense of the word. His pale skin, silver hair, and sharp features marked him as an outsider, and his cold blue eyes seemed to stare right through her. He was sitting in a corner of the market, watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't a local, and he wasn't there to buy food or cloth. He was watching her, studying her, like she was some object to be inspected. Zuri didn't understand why he was staring, but something in his gaze lingered. There was no warmth in his eyes, only calculation, as though he was sizing her up for something she couldn't yet comprehend. She quickly turned her head and hurried past him, but she felt the weight of his gaze following her, burning into her back. The next day, a knock echoed through their tiny home. Zuri's mother answered the door, and there stood Gregory Hayes, holding a briefcase, his face devoid of any expression. He spoke in the slow, deliberate tones of a man who had spent too much time in the world of business. His words were simple, direct, and horrifying. He had an offer. The offer was simple, too. A bride price so large that it could pay for her brother's treatment, cover the cost of rent, and even buy food and clothing for the next year. Gregory didn't mince words. He made it clear that this was a business transaction. Zuri's mother was furious, her face red with anger and humiliation. She slammed the door in his face. But Gregory didn't leave. He didn't argue. Instead, he waited patiently, silently. The fever worsened. Zuri's brother, Kofi, grew weaker by the hour. His body trembled with chills, his small frame drenched in sweat, and his cries echoed through the house. The clinic wouldn't take him, and no one else would help without payment. Zuri's mother was on the verge of losing her mind, her heart breaking with each desperate plea for mercy that went unanswered. She sold her sewing machine. She sold her wedding ring. She even sold Zuri's school books, the only thing she had left to offer her daughter a future. By nightfall, when Zuri's brother's cries had become soft, delirious whimpers, her mother collapsed onto the floor, her strength gone. Zuri stood in the doorway, watching the woman who had always been her protector, now broken by the weight of their poverty. In that moment, something shifted inside Zuri. She knew, without a doubt, that there was no other way. They were out of options. That night, her mother whispered through her tears, "I can't lose him. Zuri, please, I'm begging you, do it." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Zuri's heart pounded, but she didn't cry. She didn't speak. She only nodded. The decision had been made. The ceremony took place the very next morning. It was small. Barely a handful of people gathered in the dusty courtyard of her grandmother's house. The elder spoke in quiet tones, his voice muffled by the oppressive heat of the day. Gregory, dressed in an immaculate black suit, stood at the front, looking out of place among the weathered faces of the villagers. His cold eyes scanned the crowd. And then, without a word, he turned to Zuri. The elder asked if he took her as his wife. He nodded. Zuri said nothing. There was no kiss, no promise, just the stillness of a moment that would change her life forever. Zuri didn't even know how she made it through the ceremony. Her mind was a blur. her body moving on autopilot as the world seemed to spin around her. The only thing that anchored her was the thought of Kofi, of his fragile body lying in the next room. And the hope, faint as it was, that this was the only way to save him. That night, Zuri found herself in a strange guest house. The sheets crisp and unfamiliar beneath her. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands, at the life that had been handed to her without any say in the matter. Gregory didn't come near her. He sat across the room, reading a book in a language she couldn't understand. He didn't touch her, didn't speak to her beyond offering her a bowl of soup. His voice was gentle, too gentle. It confused her. She had expected something different, cruelty, perhaps, or indifference, but this was something else entirely. That night, Gregory locked the door between their rooms. Zuri sat awake, clutching a photo of her brother, the only thing that still held meaning to her. She couldn't understand why she wasn't afraid. She should have been. She should have been terrified of the strange man in the next room, of the contract she had signed with her silence. But instead, she felt numb. The next morning, Gregory invited her to take a walk through the forest behind the lodge. He handed her boots, a scarf, and a notebook. "You should write," he said, "even if it's just your thoughts." His voice was quiet, like he was offering her more than just words. It felt like a warning. She didn't know what to make of it. Why did he want her to write? What did he see in her? As they walked, Zuri couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. There was a hidden truth beneath Gregory's kindness. Something that he wasn't telling her. Something that had to do with the locked door, with the photographs of other girls. And she was determined to find out what it was. She might be a child bride, but she was not a fool. By the end of the day, Zuri had made up her mind. She would not be a passive participant in her own life. She would find the answers, no matter what it cost her. The days that followed the ceremony were strange for Zuri. She had expected brutality, fear, and a loss of agency. But what she found instead was a silent kindness that disturbed her even more. Gregory Hayes, the stranger who had bought her from her family, was unlike any man she had ever known. He never raised his voice. He never touched her, not in affection nor in ownership. And perhaps that was what unsettled her the most. In the villages where she had lived, men were dominant, loud, and demanding. They expected obedience, submission, and silence. But Gregory did none of that. Instead, he treated her as if she were glass, delicate, valuable, yet utterly untouchable. It was a quiet, eerie treatment that Zuri couldn't comprehend. Why was he treating her with such care? What did he want from her? Why had he chosen her of all the other girls in the village? Zuri's mind raced with questions that had no answers, and each passing day seemed to deepen the mystery surrounding her marriage. She was given her own room, a soft bed, and clothes that felt foreign against her skin. They were made of fine fabric, unlike the worn clothes of her childhood. Every day at precisely 4 o'clock, Gregory would serve her tea with honey and a small cookie wrapped in linen. His routine was methodical, but there was no affection in it, only ritual. At times, Zuri wondered if this was some sort of test, or if Gregory was trying to distance himself from her in a way she couldn't understand. In the evenings, Gregory would retreat to the library, where he spent hours reading books in a language she couldn't understand. Zuri found herself drawn to the room, to the warmth of the fire that crackled in the hearth, to the shelves lined with volumes of leather-bound books. She could see the faint glow of the lamp under which Gregory read, his profile illuminated by the soft, golden light. Yet, no matter how much she longed to understand him, he remained a mystery, an enigma wrapped in silence. One evening, Zuri decided to venture into the library while Gregory was still there, hoping to catch a glimpse of what he was reading. As she tiptoed closer, she froze. Gregory wasn't reading at all. He was staring into a large mirror hanging on the wall, his face pale, his lips trembling ever so slightly. He looked lost. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, were now full of something else, something darker. He wasn't looking at his reflection in the mirror. No, he was looking past it, as if he could see into another time, another world. It was as if he were talking to someone, though no words escaped his lips. Zuri's heart raced, and she slowly backed away, retreating into the shadows. What had she just seen? What did it mean? That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of Gregory, staring at his reflection with such sorrow in his eyes, haunted her. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the mystery. Why would he look at a mirror with such sadness? What had happened to him? And why was she here? The next day, Gregory invited her to take a walk through the forest behind the lodge. Zuri had no idea why he was so insistent on these walks. These quiet moments of solitude together. He handed her a pair of sturdy boots, a thick scarf, and a small notebook. "You should write," he said softly, as they stepped out into the crisp morning air. "Even if it's just your thoughts." Zuri glanced at him in confusion. "Why would I write?" He seemed to read her thoughts. "Because stories help us make sense of things," he explained, his voice steady, yet tinged with something she couldn't place. "And I think you'll need that soon." His words hung in the air like a warning. Zuri's heart beat faster. What did he mean by that? What was about to happen? As they walked through the dense forest, the canopy above them whispered with the wind, and the air smelled of pine and earth. Zuri couldn't help but feel the weight of Gregory's presence beside her. His silence was oppressive, like an unseen force. He had been kind to her, in a way that both comforted and confused her. But she had also begun to realize that something was amiss. Gregory didn't speak much about himself, and whenever she asked him questions, his answers were vague, as if he were hiding something. At the edge of the forest, they came upon a small clearing where the sun filtered through the trees, casting a soft golden light on the ground. It was here that Gregory spoke once more, his words slow and deliberate. "You don't know it yet," he began, "but you were chosen for a reason. This isn't just about me marrying you. It's about what's to come." Zuri felt a chill run down her spine. His words felt too heavy, too foreboding. But before she could ask what he meant, Gregory added, "There's something you should see." That night, after dinner, Zuri found herself unable to resist the growing curiosity that gnawed at her. She had to know the truth. She had to understand what Gregory was hiding. She had to know what he wanted from her. With her heart pounding in her chest, she slipped quietly out of her room and made her way to the hallway, her bare feet making no sound against the floorboards. At the end of the hall, there was the room Gregory had always kept locked. The door was thick, made of heavy wood with an ornate brass handle that refused to turn. Zuri had asked him about it before, but he had only smiled faintly and told her that some doors weren't ready to open. But now, with her heart racing in her chest, Zuri made her decision. She would open it. She would find out what was behind that door, no matter the cost. With trembling hands, she picked the lock and pushed the door open. The room inside was dark and silent, the air thick with dust. As Zuri stepped inside, she felt as if she had entered another world. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, of girls from all over the world. Some of them smiled, others didn't, but each photo was labeled with a name and a date, and some of the dates were marked with an X. Zuri's heart stopped as she stared at one of the photos. The girl in the picture looked so familiar, and the name beneath it sent a shock through her body. Zuri. Her hands shook as she picked up a letter from a wooden trunk in the corner of the room. The letter was addressed to someone named Marisol. As Zuri read the letter, her heart pounded in her chest. The words on the page were a haunting confession, a final goodbye from someone who had never met her. But why was it here, in this room, with her name on it? And why had Gregory kept it? Zuri barely had time to process the discovery before a voice interrupted her thoughts. "You shouldn't be here," Gregory said softly from the doorway. Zuri turned, her breath caught in her throat. Gregory's face was not angry, but tired, so tired. His eyes, once cold and calculating, now seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime. Slowly, he stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. His next words were not harsh, but they carried a weight that left Zuri breathless. "I suppose it's time you knew," he said quietly. The morning after Zuri's discovery, the air in the lodge felt heavy, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the tension from the night before. Gregory didn't speak to her immediately after their confrontation in the locked room. He simply left her alone, as though retreating into the shadow of his past. The weight of what she had uncovered, the photographs of girls who had lived lives similar to hers, the letters full of farewells and promises, pressed on Zuri's chest like a stone. But it was not the discovery itself that haunted her. It was what Gregory had said before he left the room. His words echoing in her mind. "I married you not for me, but for you." His cryptic statement made no sense at first. What did he mean? Why did he treat her like glass? Like something precious and fragile? If he was not interested in her for himself? Zuri had begun to feel the unsettling truth seeping into her bones. She wasn't just a girl married off to a stranger to save her family. She was part of a much larger story, one that was still unfolding. Days passed in a strange silence. Gregory still kept his distance, though his actions toward her remained as polite and distant as ever. He was not cruel, but neither was he the man she had imagined him to be. No, he was something more complex. A man whose past was filled with secrets. Who had spent his life moving in the shadows, helping girls like Zuri escape the fate of forced marriages or worse. Zuri had been right to wonder. There was something extraordinary about him. Something that went beyond wealth or power. Gregory had been on a mission she couldn't yet understand fully. But one that involved more than just charity. He was a protector, a guardian in a world that often refused to care for those who needed it most. But why had he chosen her? Why had he not helped the others like him? Like the girls whose faces adorned the walls of that locked room? Why had he married her? It was only after Gregory's sudden death that Zuri learned the full truth. One morning, as she entered the lodge, the silence felt different, too still. The house was eerily quiet. And Gregory was not in the library or the dining room. His absence was like a hole in the house. A gaping space that no amount of cleaning or order could fill. The servants were hushed, their faces tense, and Zuri's heart began to race as she made her way upstairs to Gregory's room. There, lying in his bed, was Gregory Hayes. He looked pale, his skin nearly ashen, and his body was still. His chest, once rising and falling with the rhythm of life, was silent. Zuri's breath caught in her throat as she approached him, her hand trembling as she reached out and touched his arm. He was gone. In that moment, Zuri's world seemed to shatter, the weight of the discovery hitting her all at once. She wasn't just a child bride to a man who had come to save her from a cruel fate, she was the heir to his legacy. As the shock of Gregory's death settled into a strange numbness, Zuri learned more about him in the days that followed. A lawyer arrived at the estate with a sealed envelope in hand. The letter he handed to Zuri was addressed to her, and it was written in Gregory's familiar hand. It spoke of his plans for her, of his quiet, unspoken mission that had driven him all these years. The letter revealed the extent of Gregory's work. He had spent decades traveling the world, rescuing girls from forced marriages, trafficking, and abandonment. He had used his wealth, his resources, and his influence to make a difference in the lives of those who had been forgotten by society. But he had done it quietly, without fanfare, operating off the record, out of sight. He had not wanted to be recognized as a savior. Instead, he had wanted to save those girls without making them feel indebted to him. In his letter, Gregory explained that he had married Zuri not because of a personal need or desire, but because he had seen the terrible fate awaiting her. The foreign businessman who had planned to buy her had already set his sights on her. He had been buying brides for years, purchasing girls from destitute families who had no other choice. But Gregory had refused to let that happen to Zuri. He had come to her village to stop that man from taking her and to give Zuri a chance, something she would never have had otherwise. Zuri's inheritance was not just material, it was the responsibility to continue Gregory's work. She was now the sole heir to his estate, his fortune, and most importantly, his mission. The will stipulated that the estate would pass to Zuri, but with the understanding that she would carry on Gregory's legacy. The first step was to ensure her safety, her freedom, but there was more. The lawyer, a woman named Miss Barrow, explained that Gregory had left detailed instructions for Zuri to follow. There were funds set aside for her education, for the development of the lodge into a sanctuary for girls in need, and for the establishment of a network to protect young girls from the dangers of child marriage and trafficking. But there was more. Hidden within Gregory's will was a list. A list of names, dates, and locations, documented evidence of the corrupt men, officials, and businessmen who had been buying girls, exploiting them, and making a profit from their misery. Gregory had been compiling this list for years, slowly building a case to expose the dark networks that thrived off the pain of the innocent. And now, it was Zuri's turn to finish what he had started. Zuri's heart pounded as she looked at the documents before her. She had inherited not just wealth, but a fight for those who had no voice, for those who were still trapped in the darkness. She felt the weight of the responsibility settle upon her. But something inside her also stirred. This was her chance to do something that mattered, to change the world in ways she had never thought possible. It wasn't easy. There were whispers in the village. Many people thought she was cursed, that she was dangerous. The villagers didn't understand why a young girl who had barely escaped one fate now stood at the head of a movement to prevent others from falling into the same trap. But Zuri was resolute. She was no longer just a victim of circumstance. She had a purpose now. With Miss Barrow's help, Zuri began using Gregory's wealth to fund the construction of a clinic in the village, where the sick and impoverished could receive care. She also built a school where girls could learn without fear of being married off or sold. The local girls, the ones who had been overlooked for so long, began to thrive in an environment that encouraged them to dream. Zuri made it clear that no girl under 14 would be married. Anyone who tried would be reported to a new registry that she had created from Gregory's instructions. Word of Zuri's transformation spread quickly. She wasn't just a girl who had inherited a fortune. She was a girl who had taken control of her destiny and used her power to make a difference. By the time she was 14, she had spoken at the United Nations, sharing her story and the stories of other girls who had been rescued from the dark world of forced marriage. By 15, she had helped change legislation in 3 countries, making child marriage under the age of 16 punishable by law. She had become a voice for those who had none, a beacon of hope for girls who had been sold and forgotten. Zuri's mission was only beginning. She was no longer a girl who had been sold to a man in exchange for her family's survival. She was a leader, a fighter, and a force to be reckoned with. Her voice, once silenced by the fear of her fate, now resonated with power. Years later, she returned to the village where it all began, standing before the school she had built. The laughter of girls filled the air as they played, studied, and lived freely, something that would have been impossible if not for the legacy Gregory had left her. And as she looked out over the horizon, she whispered to the wind, "I hope you see me now." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a brief moment, Zuri could have sworn she heard Gregory's voice, soft and steady. "I always did." Zuri smiled. She had carried his fire. She had burned the dark.